Love staying informed? Subscribe now and get unlimited access to local news, weather, and sports for just 99 cents a month for your first 3 months at inforum.news/join. Read every story, listen to every podcast, and download the apps that keep you informed and on the go 24 hours a day. So head to inforum.news/join right now to subscribe. What are you waiting for? Get 3 months of local news for just 99 cents a month at inforum.news/join.
You're listening to Plain Talk, the voice of North Dakota politics. I'm your host, Rob Port. If I sound distracted, it's because I've been busy covering this story all morning. I'm joined by my co-host, Chad Oban.
He's right of center, I'm left of center, both sides of the political spectrum.
I think it's cathartic. I think it's a necessary and proper debate. I'm glad we're having it.
And honestly, we have to do better.
Okay, I don't know why I'm getting blamed for this, right? Welcome to Plain Talk, and as we head into the holiday season, and by the way, this is, for Chad and I, this is our last live show of 2024. So this is pretty much it. After this, we have a pre-recorded Christmas show that'll be launching next week, and then we have a couple of reruns that'll run, and then Jessica Bell is going to be sitting in for a show, and then after that, we will be back. But in the meantime, for our last show of the year, we're gonna end strong. There's been a debate, and by the way, our first guest, Senator Daah Patten, he's going to be talking about the National Monument controversy, discussion. It depends on what you want to call it. We'll be talking about that in a moment. Also coming up in the second part of the show, you know, there's a lot of controversy over President Joe Biden's pardons on his way out of the office, and a lot of it, you know, obviously focused on him pardoning his son and maybe some others. I don't think people realize there were a bunch of pardons that were very that touched on our part of the world. I mean, people who were convicted in our part of the world, and they were pardoned. We have a federal judge who's pushing back on it, and now a local prosecutor who prosecuted one of those cases is also going to be on the show about it. That's State's Attorney Lad Erickson. He's going to be on the second part of the show. But for now, let's get to our guest, Senator Daah Patten. And what I wanted to have Senator Patten on was to talk about the, it's called the Maah Hay Trail National Monument. Now, you probably have already heard of the Maah Hay Trail. If you haven't, it is a wonderful resource in North Dakota. It's a beautiful trail, gets used a lot. I mean, if you Google it, if you're not into like biking and hiking, if you Google it, it is very highly rated. People love it. It's great for tourism. It's great for culture. It's a beautiful thing. And it's currently on federal land, and I believe, and maybe Senator Patten can correct me, I believe it's currently under the auspices of the U.S. Forest Service. But there's a proposal that is asking President Joe Biden to take it and declare it a national monument. And that has created a lot of question marks about what does that mean? Because if we're talking about Western North Dakota, we're talking about a lot of land use. Energy development comes to mind, but obviously ranching, grazing, even other types of recreational use. What does this mean? And you know, there's grown some controversy about it. So anyway, here to talk with us about it is Senator Patten. And Senator, did I get everything right there? Did I introduce it correctly?
Pretty much, except I would disagree that it's actually about the Maah Hay Trail. They call it the Maah Hay National Monument. The Maah Hay Trail is just a few feet wide and a little over 100 miles long, 100 and some miles long. This is 140,000 acres. It's the equivalent of twice the size of Teddy Roosevelt National Park, all the units. So it's much more encompassing than just the trail. It follows along the trail, but it covers a lot more acres than the trail.
So, Senator Patten, first of all, Merry Christmas and greetings. Your former colleague, Aaron Oban, who you know is very fond of you and enjoyed working with you very much. So, here's what I'm struggling with a little bit on this issue. Something that I'm not involved in, I'm not following very closely. It feels like the two sides on this thing, it's like you're talking about two different proposals, right? I read the article in the North Dakota Monitor where the guy from the North Dakota Wildlife Federation said it's essentially just changing signs. That's the only thing that would be different. Obviously, you have a different perspective on that. Can you talk a little bit about your perspective and why are we why is this, like, people have such different perspectives on what will happen with this designation?
I'm going to do a little bit of a comparison, and I'm going to use the bill draft as an example. If we say, okay, we want to put together a bill to do something, and whatever it is, and you say, but we don't know what it's going to look like, but here's our idea. So we want the legislature to pass a bill that's blank, have the governor sign it, and then we will fill in the details later. That's the equivalent of what the national monument does. The president signs the declaration of a national monument, and then afterwards, then you write the management plan. So the proposal has some ideas for what the management plan would include, but it is by no means what would actually ultimately happen. Upon the declaration of a national monument, then all of a sudden the national players become involved as well. They get to provide their input, their direction. They can be changed in size by a following president. They can be changed in scope and use by a following president. And they've done a lot of that over the past years. So the intent is not locked into what the proposal says, or the ultimate result is not locked into what the proposal says. It's what happens after the fact. And that's the issue that we have.
One thing I think that drives a lot of concern here is the mechanism through which this would be declared. It uses authority granted to the president by federal legislation that's over 100 years old. It's the Antiquities Act. And it essentially allows the president to create this with the stroke of his pen. Now, normally when we're talking about land use issues, if we're, there's a lot of rigmarole. And there's good reason for that at times. I mean, maybe sometimes we get a little frustrated with the process, but a lot of it is about bringing many players to the table and having discussions and making sure that when we make decisions about land use, that there's a lot of different players involved. My perception is a lot of the concern about this is because there is so much autonomy here in the president that we could get something locked in. I guess to your point, it's kind of a blank check. Am I perceiving that right?
That's correct.
So what do we? Well, one thing, I had a lengthy conversation with Chairman Mark Fox, where by the way, I mean, part of it was we were talking about we got on the topic of kind of being good neighbors with one another in North Dakota and the tribal communities and the state communities and everything. And I was talking about how my family homesteaded from Norway down by in the Ryder Plaza area, down sort of near his neck of the woods. And he told me that on his mother's side, his family also homesteaded from Norway. So me and the chairman of the 3 affiliated tribes were bonding over our shared Norwegian heritage.
Yeah.
Only in North Dakota. But when I was talking,
By the way, Rob, I'm also from Plaza.
Also from wonderful. Well, maybe we're related in some way.
I have no connections to Plaza that I'm aware of.
Okay. Well, our listeners in Plaza have now been well served. One of the things I was talking about with Chairman Fox, or I guess that the concern that he was expressing is there's uncertainty. Like he's saying, well, what does this mean? And they're not against the idea. And I'm really not sure that anybody involved in this debate is against the idea per se. But his point was, what does it mean for us? Because they don't want to do anything that stops oil development, because that's huge, oil and gas development, because that's hugely in favor of them too. So how do we do this process where we get some certainty to those questions?
And that's the challenge with national monuments is you can't. They designate and then they write the management plan. And because it's a presidential declaration, not an agency declaration, none of the other procedures that are in place to protect all the stakeholders' interests apply. For example, NEPA does not apply. The Federal Land Procedures or Management Procedures Act, FLPMA, does not apply. They designate and then they write the rules. It has resulted in lawsuits after lawsuits in many areas, going back to, and actually right now, Wyoming, you cannot do another national monument in Wyoming without congressional approval. You can't do another national monument in Alaska that's over 5,000 acres without congressional approval.
Why is that? What happened?
Because when they designated certain national monuments there, they created such an uproar that ultimately Congress gave them those exemptions. They didn't make it uniform across the entire country, but they gave those states those exemptions. There's over 550 million acres of national monuments right now. Actually, a lot of them are actually in the ocean. The Northern Hawaiian Islands, for example, is huge. The Marianas Trench is another example. In all cases, they restrict something. In the ocean-going ones, they restrict fishing, commercial fishing in some cases, recreational fishing. Don't know if the fish know that or not. Out here, hunting season shows up, the national park fills with deer because they kind of know that's a safe zone. But when you go back to the Antiquities Act, the intent was to protect sites of historical or prehistorical significance. And there was language in there that said of the smallest footprint that is possible. Now, that part has been abused to a great deal. I mean, we've got millions of acres of national monuments that are out there right now. It is a circumvention of I'm going to call congressional intent when wilderness is declared. It requires Congress to act on that. In this case, you can actually do the same effective thing, declare wilderness without congressional approval, without any federal agency approval, without a local stakeholder engagement at all. The draft plan that they presented talked about protecting grazing, but they never engaged with any of these stakeholders that do graze on these lands. They found out about it in a press release about 3 or 4 weeks ago. They never came forward and talked to any of the grazing association members, notified them about their intent. And I would think that if their intent was to protect that they would have brought forward their plan and said, let's talk about this to the people that actually live there and deal with it.
Senator Patten, you said that after this would be approved, then they would write a land management plan. And this might be a dumb question, but who's the they? Is it a specific agency, the federal agency that writes that plan?
Yes, and it depends on who the monument gets assigned to. Now, it would be common that the agency that is administering the lands now would be the one that would write the plan, but it isn't necessarily guaranteed. U.S. Forest Service under USDA is the one that administers the land right now. But it could be moved to Department of Interior and BLM. In some cases, Fish and Wildlife has been the administrator. Some cases, the national parks have been administrators. Matter of fact, some of these national monuments have actually resulted in being declared national parks subsequently.
What is the status of this land right now? I mean, my understanding that it's not, the 140,000 acres is not, when I listen to the proponents, they say it's not private land. It's already federal land. So what essentially would this change?
Okay, it is federal land, but there is some carve-outs with private or state land. And matter of fact, in one of the locations, I know that I think there's a state section in the middle of it, which affects that use. So here's what happens with this. It's being grazed right now, and I'll agree that some of this, and I'm not sure if all of it is managed for what's called no surface occupancy for mineral extraction. What that means is that you can lease the minerals and access them from adjacent land, but you can't locate the drilling rig or the wellhead on the federal land.
So basically they can get under through horizontal drilling or whatnot.
Correct. Now, typically when we're looking at this, we don't know what the plan would be, but one of the indications is that they want to prevent development. Well, that would probably potentially mean that they would not lease the federal minerals. And there are other associated state minerals and private minerals that would be affected by something where if the state minerals that are not leasable, then the rest of them are impacted. As an important component of this, remember, these are reacquired lands under the Bankhead-Jones Act. And when that happened, the counties were granted a 6.25% royalty interest on these lands. So a lot of this land has a county royalty interest underneath them that would no longer be available for the county. Counties, McKenzie, Billings, Slope County would receive revenue from oil development. And again, could be horizontal drilling that accesses the federal minerals, no surface occupancy. That potentially goes away.
Well, based on everything you just said, I'm starting to understand why these national monuments result in a lot of litigation. I mean, when the president of the United States makes sort of a sweeping regulation, I mean, there's a reason, again, why land use stuff or water, I mean, all of these things are complicated because you have to bring so many people to the table. And when you do it the right way, it's arduous. It takes a long time to hammer out all those interests. as opposed to this process where the president can essentially sign a document and away we go. You know, that's
Absolutely
a problematic way of doing it. Chad, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead, Senator.
As a point, just this past week, I think it was WBI came out with what they call a non-binding open season for a natural gas pipeline that would run from south of Watford City, south, and then over east, basically along 200 over to Washburn, potentially all the way to Jamestown and on to Castleton and Fargo, a natural gas pipeline. Huge. I mean, we have a lot of natural gas and we keep producing more of it. And our goal is to be able to use that natural gas in North Dakota for value-added energy, value-added ag, all these different opportunities we have. That pipeline would go right through this area. As a point of reference, down in southern Minnesota, there's a Pipestone National Monument. One Oak has a pipeline that actually runs through that they're working on rebuilding. Because of the national monument status, they're being required to detour around it by many, many miles. I mean, we're not saying avoid the monument. They have to go much further beyond it than just adjacent to it. So there's impacts like that we don't know. They've identified as threats to the national monument or the land as oil development, pipelines, Highway 85, four-laning of 85. They've all identified as threats. Many of these national monuments where grazing is involved, they've either reduced or eliminated grazing in some respects. There was even a national monument where when it was declared, there was a Native American tribe that was involved. They got kicked off the national monument, and it took them years in lawsuits in order to get access back to it. So there's a wide range of impacts that could happen. We don't know what they are because none of this has been, there's been no hearings on it. There's been no public meetings on it. There's been no private or no stakeholder engagement with either the state, the federal, congressional delegation, the counties, the grazing associations, tourism, none of that.
Senator, I want to talk a little bit about the politics around this because there is some suggestions that politics are at play. The first thing I would mention is the North Dakota News Co-op just had a poll that came out that basically said North Dakotans want to protect the oil and coal industry, which I would agree with, but also want more regulations to protect our land, which often are conflicts. But I think North Dakota has done a pretty good job of that in the past. And when this plan came out, according to the North Dakota Monitor, Governor Burgum said North Dakota's proof that we can protect our precious parks, cultural heritage, natural resources, and responsibility and sustainably develop our vast energy resources. And so he had that statement. He now has some concerns about this, said he's surprised about this plan, but his staff was aware of this back in February, which is 9 months ago now. And then I will also mention Todd Leak from the Sierra Club said this is all because it's Biden, which I don't really buy that. But is there politics at play here in terms of there's an acceleration of trying to get this done before the new president comes into play, and then maybe some opposition being like, yeah, if this Biden guy is for it, maybe it's not such a good idea?
As the proposal sits with 140,000 acres, I don't care who the president would be, you would find opposition. There's a difference between getting a phone call and being said, we're looking at a proposal for a national monument, and then being engaged in the development of the proposal. And I think that's what happened. They called the governor's office and says, we're looking at this. If they had called me, it would have, that's different. If they'd have called the grazing associations, they never called the oil industry and said, we're looking at this. So there was no engagement. That's a different level, meaning that we're sitting at the table when this is being talked about.
Well, and that's, I can interject actually from my own reporting where, I mean, the governor's office, you're saying there's no consultation. This was billed early on as being tribally led. But when I talked to probably, I mean, the most, impacted tribe, I mean, they're the ones who are in this area, the three affiliated tribes, Chairman Mark Fox, I think he was surprised at the idea that they were leading it. It was more like, well, they came and asked us about it, and literally the word he used was, we thought it was neat. But they hadn't run through. I think when they said monument, they're thinking, oh, it's a statue or something. I don't think they knew all the implications. So I don't feel like, I mean, and now they're saying they're reconsidering their support. Not again because they're against the concept, but because there's so many questions here that they want answered, and they're very worried about this sort of hurry up, that they're going to get stuck with something that hurts them long term because it got rushed through. So anyway, I mean, when we're talking about the consulting stuff, that's another point in that, I believe.
Yeah. I don't want to put words in their mouths, but my understanding, what they've told me, was when it was proposed to them, they were not informed as far as the scope and impact and what this actually meant. The other thing of note, as of yesterday, the Tribal Business Council voted and signed a resolution withdrawing their support of the monument proposal, and have asked for additional information regarding the impact.
So, Senator Patten, if there was like a sit down with the grazing industry and the oil industry on something like this, do you think there could be common ground that could be found that maybe isn't quite as expansive as this monument, maybe goes through a different process? Or is this going to be one of those situations where some people want it and some people are hell no matter what on it?
So I guess the question is, what is it that people are wanting that's different than what's taking place right now?
Right.
I think we have a very good system set up for managing what's taking place out there right now. When we say we want to compromise, does that mean if there are some sacred sites, let's identify them, but let's identify the sites themselves. And how do you want to deal with that as a Native American community? Do you want to have some level of identification to show where they're at, or maybe you don't want to have that? Do you want to have some plaques and history related to that? I found it, and some of the tribal members also found it interesting, that all this proposal took place off reservation, without any, there are probably many cultural sites on the reservation that would definitely have been qualified as far as being of sacred or historical significance that could have been included. And my question is, why did they just only do it off reservation in their proposal? I know it's a question that was asked by some of the tribal members as well. So is there a way that something could be done? Absolutely. We could sit down with the tribes and the local counties and grazing associations in the state and take a look at what it is that they actually want as far as honoring the sacred nature of some of these sites. Do we have to involve the federal government to do that? Absolutely not. That could be done locally.
So I guess what I'm hearing is that nobody's against doing something. It's just, let's be specific about it, and let's be intentional about it, and let's be comprehensive in who we're bringing in to talk about it. Senator Patten, one thing that has frustrated me a little bit as I've heard people talk about this is it's been, it's basically, it's been very unusual, because I'm hearing the proponents, and I look at their coalition, it's groups like the Sierra Club, and I know how the Sierra Club feels about fossil fuel energy. They're not for it. So, but I hear them saying, well, this isn't going to impact oil development or energy development at all. But the Sierra Club's there, and when you read their document, they're putting oil and gas development, they're saying it's a threat. So how does it not, there seems like a dissonance there. Like, how can you say, well, oil and gas development is a threat, so that's why we have to do this, but also this isn't going to impact oil and gas development? That doesn't make any sense to me.
When their national agenda is the elimination of fossil fuels, I find it hard to believe that they wouldn't push that agenda after the designation of a monument. Some of the results of this, there's been actually a fair number of attacks on me personally in the press related to this. They got personal. I've never done that, and I'm not going to start now. But I always try to deal with the issue. Whether somebody's agrees with me or disagrees, I always treat them with respect. I treat them with dignity when they testify in front of me. And whether they agree or disagree, I always feel that they've walked out of my committee hearings and been treated fairly, regardless of what the decision is. So when we look at the national agendas of some of these groups, though, they are opposed to fossil fuels. And I think the MHA Nation and Mark Fox said that's not where they're at. They are supportive of the development of energy resources. And I think that's why they've withdrawn their support at this point. They're saying, we want to have a better understanding of what your intention is before we even go there as far as supporting this.
Senator, in a couple of weeks, you're going to be down here in Bismarck and chairing, I believe, the Energy and Environment Committee in the state Senate. Is there anything around this issue you expect to happen legislatively to slow down this sort of designation or something like that? You said other states have rules in place that say, Congress has to approve or the legislature has to approve. Understand this is a federal issue, but is there anything you're planning on doing in the state Senate or any of your colleagues planning on doing legislatively?
We could, but I don't think it has any impact. Whatever has happened in restricting it at the federal level, like Wyoming and Alaska, was done at the congressional level. And there has been multiple bills introduced and dealing with restricting acres, tightening up the restrictions, typically not going very far because of opposition.
I wonder if that would be worthwhile. I mean, maybe that's something our legislature could do, is pass a resolution asking on our federal delegation to make, the sort of exemption I think you were talking about that like Wyoming and Alaska have, to craft something like that for North Dakota, and not something that stops national monuments from happening, but something that ensures that it's not this unilateral decision that's made far away from North Dakota in Washington, D.C., with very little input from the various stakeholders in North Dakota, whether they're tribal or industrial or agricultural or just private, proper recreational tourism. I mean, all the different stakeholders. I feel like there needs to be a process, and it needs to be something more than the president just says so when it happens. Because again, like I stand, it belongs to so many of us. So I mean, I guess that's what I mean, whatever happens with this situation, and I hope we pump the brakes and maybe find a way to do this the right way, because I don't think the way they're pushing it is the right way. But then on top of that, maybe North Dakota needs some protection here, and to make sure, if somebody wants to do this, great. Let's put the idea on the table. Let's get everybody who it's going to impact around that table, and let's kick it around and see what we can do. I think that's the right way to do it.
Yeah, I don't want to give the impression that we're opposed or I'm opposed to national monuments. The Statue of Liberty is a national monument. The President Biden just declared the Carlisle Indian School, where Jim Thorpe went, as a national monument. There's an appropriate use of the Antiquities Act to create national monuments. And I think there's 163 national monuments that have been declared. I guess my opposition comes into play when they use this broad scope and scale to essentially try to create wilderness and circumvent Congress and local stakeholder interest by declaring it using the presidential pen.
Senator Patten, thanks for your time.
You bet. Thank you, guys.
Hey friends, we've got a new way for you to participate in the show. You can now call us or text us with your questions, comments, or anything you want us to discuss on Plain Talk. Just give us a call or shoot us a text message at 701-587-3141. That's 701-587-3141. It's super easy. Leave your message, tell us your name and where you're from, and we might feature it on an upcoming episode.
Thanks for listening to Plain Talk. Now let's get back to today's episode.
The cold cases you see at The Vault have captivated readers across our region for years. At The Vault Podcast, our team of professional reporters takes you further into those stories with new interviews from family members, investigators, and experts. Check out The Vault at inforum.com/The Vault and subscribe to The Vault wherever you find your podcasts.
Welcome back. Just finished up a very good discussion with Senator Dale Patten about the national monument thing. And Chad, the one thing I am liking about the way the debate's shaping up, it's been a little hostile, but I really like that the people who are being critical are not ruling. I mean, we're not against the whole idea. It's just they want it done the right way. I don't think that's an unreasonable ask. I don't think that's unreasonable.
No, I don't think it's unreasonable, but the real question I have is, if the Grazing Association, if the oil industry gets to the table, are they actually open to something, or is it just going to be two sides staring at each other? I think that's what I'd like to see, is get them at the table see if they can find some common ground to move this. I agree with Senator Patten, maybe not include the feds in it, but let's figure out if there's a way to we're doing right by the state and by the industries that we need to strive here to make North Dakota
doing right by our tribal friends as well. So that's, yeah, there's just a right way to do it. And the thing is, we don't know how anybody's going to react around that table until you get them around the table.
Yep.
So
until you ask them for input. And there is a difference between notifying somebody that you're doing something and asking them for input on what it would look like.
Yeah.
I thought Senator Patten did a very good job of explaining those are two different things, and I agree 100%.
Agreed. We're going to switch gears here and talk a little bit about pardons. And as Chad, in the opening, I was talking about people getting pardoned. There's a legal distinction here that's important to make. There are pardons and there are commutations. I actually had our next guest, Lad Erickson. He's a state's attorney in McLean County. I had to have him explain this to me a little bit. So, and I'm gonna regurgitate his explanation.
Or we could just have Lad explain it to the listeners, right, if that makes sense.
Yeah, but then they wouldn't get to hear my mellifluous voice. All right, maybe they want to hear that. Lad, what's the difference between a commutation and a pardon?
Well, so I could appear like I'm a sage on the hill on this stuff. I did some research last night. And when the founders put this in the
according to the Wikipedia articles I read last night.
Yeah. When the founders were at the Constitutional Convention, prior systems we sent the most learned, read people to be Constitutional Convention members. They had their own libraries and stuff, and those are the ones the states picked to go write this thing in. Pardon power the king had, and it was basically something that wasn't controversial to put in, that the president is going to be able to pardon people. We're going to write that in black letter law in the Constitution. The reason that the debate happened basically was there is no way the legislative branch, from their study of the Roman system and the Greek system and the English system, there was no way that the founders could anticipate that they felt the legislature could, the Congress in this case, could anticipate every application of law, that they feel like, well, that isn't what we meant. We need a safeguard for a free society. We need a safeguard, which is presidential pardon, because that's not how the law was supposed to be applied. So they could pardon. And that extends to commutation, or, okay, we're not pardoning you. You're still going to have this on your record, but your sentence is just extreme for what the conduct is, because we didn't anticipate it like this. So what the mind of the framers is to have a safeguard, because they're trying to create a free society. So one person vested in the president could say, that's not what was intended. This is just obscene. What happened to this person? We're going to give you a commutation. Your sentence is done. You did 5 years. You're sentenced to 25, but you're done. And then there's the pardon, where we're just going to pardon you and excuse your behavior. And they left all that up to the president with basically unfettered discretion to decide.
I always perceived it as a check on the judiciary. If you have, it's basically the executive, because the governors, depending on which state you're talking about, have some degree of authority here as well. And I always thought it's part of the checks and balances, right? It's something that the executive branch can do, hopefully only in extraordinary cases, to right or wrong. So anyway, the way it's being wielded by President Biden on his way out the door has created a lot of controversy. And he's gotten a lot of flack left and right for his pardoning of his son. But there's been some other ones. Now, recently we had federal judge Dan Hovland from our part of the world, who, essentially he's based out of Bismarck, who wrote a very terse letter, is how it was described by our reporter, Tasha Carvel, wrote a very terse letter asking for an explanation about some pardons and that happened in cases under his jurisprudence. And then also, Lad, you had one where a case from your part of the world, Hunter Hanson, you called and what Mr. Hanson received was a commutation. But you called it ridiculous and despicable. So let's start talking about that case in particular. Why ridiculous? Why despicable?
Well, it's the arbitrariness of it, and not the consideration. And And just let's be honest, you guys, you know darn well President Biden didn't study the Hunter Hanson case, right? He's got 1,500 of these files put on his desk to put his rubber stamp on. It's his pardon office. And so when I say that, I can just to make sure that I'm an equal offender, I think some of the stuff that President Trump has said he's going to pardon on day one is despicable. I mean, people that bear sprayed cops and hit them with spears that made out of flagpoles. You're not even considering the facts of what person did, and that's not what pardons were for. And we can go back through history. Mark Rich was a famous scam artist that got pardoned on President Clinton's last day, and his wife was a big Democratic donor. Well, that's despicable. That's not what that was for. And each party, each president has those type of pardons that just don't make sense for what the founders originally intended. So when I look at this, it's the arbitrariness of not considering. We had a federal district judge that looked at a sentence reduction, thoughtful, victims testified, all that kind of stuff. And all of a sudden this thing gets just pencil whipped with no explanation. And that's what I consider an abuse of the pardon process, or that you're not considering the fact that there's still victims suffering from his crimes and he's getting commutated out. That's what is frustrating.
So for people who don't know, who weren't following, who is Hunter Hanson?
He was a kid from New Rockford, 20 years old. He worked at an elevator, and he learned that the elevator was trading grain through a market maker in the suburbs of Minneapolis. And he saw how it went, and so they let him do some of that. He was basically just the guy that cleaned out the grain trucks. And then he learned how to trade grain and represented himself as the New Rockford elevator agent. So they got a comfort level with dealing with him, and he set up some trades, and then he formed his own roving grade train company and then continued to work with that market maker. And then what he did is he would set up small grain deals, and he would always pay $1 more than the market rate. So people can make another buck on a bushel of wheat or peas or whatever. They did business and they got paid. But how he made money, as soon as he picked up the grain, he would sell it for the market rate, which is $1 less than he paid for it. He would pick it up at one elevator and sell it to another elevator at $1 loss a bushel. But the people that sold him the grain would get paid. But they were getting paid because he had other customers paying him. It's a Ponzi scheme. And then once he developed a statewide comfort level with what he was doing, and everybody was making $1 more a bushel, then he upped the grain deals to hundreds of thousands of dollars. And then nobody's getting paid, just him. And then as he was doing his takedown of the scam and bankrupting people, he took his 17-year-old girlfriend to Paris for a week. He went to Las Vegas and bought a $200,000 Mercedes-Benz. He bought a $300,000 RV. He was just living extravagantly as he's putting elevators and farmers out of business. And that's essentially what happened with me being really frustrated that some of those places have never recovered. And now they get a letter from his lawyers or whoever saying, hey, this kid has done really well in prison. He's trained as an electrician. Okay, we're going to commute him. Well, some of those people have never recovered from his crimes,
So, lad, I spent some time this morning trying to figure out how to justify these things as a bit of a partisan myself, and I can't figure out for the life of me how to justify any of what's happening here, right? I think we went through the pardons, the Mark Rich pardon, the Roger Stone pardon. I mean, you can go through the history of pardons and presidents abusing these things. This sort of idea of granting commutation clemency to 1,500 people, this seems new to me. And it also seems super random. Like, I'm trying to figure out, what do these 1,500 people have in common that why were they on President Biden's desk? Why did they get the stamp? Do you have any idea of sort of the why this group of people? And isn't that new?
Yeah, that's what's frustrating is they gave no, on the commutations like Hunter Hanson, they gave no explanation for why they consider, and there's thousands of people in federal prison that probably have a better case to make on commutation than Hunter Hanson. And that's what's frustrating. And if maybe to get my level of irritation with this, if you guys, Chad and Rob, are the pardon counsel for the White House, I would like to tell you some things. I would like to tell you that if you get to rural North Dakota and you have a co-op elevator owned by the patrons, that's likely the biggest employer of that area. Everybody every farmer and rancher within a 40-mile radius of that elevator is a patron, and every year they get a dividend check. So when you say there's 60 victims, there's actually, when you shut down a co-op elevator, that's how those people with that dividend check pay for their kids to get educated as electricians or welders. That's how those farm families pay for their health insurance, is that dividend check from being involved. So there's 60 direct victims, but when you shut down a number of elevators, that whole region, it's the number one employer, and those employees got health insurance and benefits. You wipe them out. And these co-op elevators operate on a small margin, and they're competing with Cargill and ADM. So when you come in and take $800,000 in a scam, there's years where those patrons that own that elevator, if it survives, are not going to get the dividend check that they're depending on for their farming operations. I'd like to tell pardon counsel these kind of things, is when a kid targets it, because he worked at a co-op elevator, he knows the importance of those to a rural community, and then he deliberately made marks out of them and took them down, meaning he's affecting hundreds of people. So why would you consider a commutation? What is it that makes this kid special? And the only explanation we have is they said he did electrical training in prison. Well, the victims of those co-op elevators, they want their kids to be electricians and welders and get training, and they want those patron checks to do that. And it's just really frustrating.
I'm glad if he's being rehabilitated in prison. I'm glad. That means something's working. That's good. I don't think that excuses what he did. I mean, when I think of the pardon power, the commutation power, when I think of this, I think of it as, again, the executive branch. Our criminal justice system isn't perfect. We know this. And so it's about the executive branch maybe being able to right some wrongs with an extraordinary power. And so I'm thinking of people who got the short end of the stick because of racism, or they got the book thrown at them because of some quirk in the law, and they ended up with a sentence. Maybe they did it, but their sentence is out of proportion to reality. Those are things where I think it's appropriate for a governor or the president to step in and do something. Adam Martin, we just had Governor Burgum on the way out the door did a pardon for Adam Martin of the F5 project, who had a criminal background, but since has become a very effective advocate on a number of fronts, and I think is an extraordinary example for a very good use of that power. And so I guess, do you have any insight into how, like, Hunter Hanson or some of these other North Dakota cases ended up on the president's desk? I mean, were there activists or advocates somewhere that put this in front of him?
I have no idea, and that's one of the frustrations that I think Judge Hovland expressed is, wait a second, no notice to victims, no notice to the people that were involved that could provide you some more information for a deliberative thought. And you're exactly right, Rob. You don't want a federal judge out there that sentenced black people 10 times harder than he sentences white people or something. You need a check valve. That's what the founders anticipated, is we'll have a check valve here. The system is not perfect. It's full of humans. And and the overall goal of the Constitution is a free society. So we need to be able to have pardons. And I support that. It's just that modern application has become politicized. And you would hope that if you guys were bound counsel, or we would deliberate, we'd make a few phone calls. Miko Pates from Ag Week did a yeoman amount of reporting. Jenny Schleck too, on that Hunter Hanson case. Just a quick Google search. You could have read, which I doubt they did. They got an application and they just acted on it, where they could have just Googled Hunter Hanson and read some really in-depth, solid reporting on what had happened to all these North Dakota families and businesses. It would have been a total different light, you would think, on them considering him.
How offensive is it to prosecutors like you and judges? And I think about the U.S. Attorney's Office that probably worked to put a lot of these people behind bars. How offensive is this to you all?
Well, I'm offended in this respect. I gave you some background on the kid, but what was going on at the time is, in this courtroom I'm sitting in now, we had piles of grain trays laid out. We were trying to put together the business ontology of what was happening. And at some point in our investigation, we did bring in the USDA criminal investigators, and that ultimately led to the U.S. Attorney's Office. But it was the end of March, and the U.S. Attorney's Office was interested in the case, but they couldn't grand jury him till July, and now it's around the 1st of April. And then what happened is the PSC had done a cease and desist. So his grain trading businesses had gotten publication through Ag Week across the state that this guy's cannot trade grain. Instead of adjusting his behavior, he bought an interest in a car dealership in Belcourt. And he went to a Chevy dealership in Rugby and bought 8 pickups. This is after he's already all over the news, after his grain trading license had been suspended. He buys 8 pickups one day for $45,000. He doesn't have to pay for those pickups for 30 days on the accounts receivable, the way businesses work. He gets those 8 pickups up to the Belcourt car dealership and sells them all the next week for $35,000. Now, if you think of that, Rugby car dealership is not going to release the titles to the vehicles till they get their money. The people that go up to a car dealership and see 8 pickups sitting there and they can save $10,000 are going to buy a pickup, pay cash for it, get a temporary sticker. And when you're buying from a car dealership, you're fully expecting that DOT is going to send you a license plate and a title within the next 3 weeks or so. But that's never going to happen because Rugby's never going to release the title. So I called a meeting with everybody involved, including the U.S. Attorney's Office. I said, guys, we can't wait till July. There'll be hundreds of more victims. So I went ahead and filed state charges for racketeering, checks, whatever I could, just to clip the kid. Well, he did all that stuff with the cars after he was outed by Ag Week and Michael Pates and Jenny Schleck across the state, after he had a cease desist order. And then I'm looking at this from a bond counsel point of view, and at the same time, by the way, he does the car scams. He goes to Paris. He buys the Mercedes. Why were we considering this kid for a commutation, you know?
Name some of the other cases, because there were a number of other cases. Were other cases yours, or what? No. Okay.
No.
So
no, I wasn't familiar. Judge Hovland pointed out at 2013 there was a bank scam or something like that where a person got commuted. I had no involvement in that, so.
I was just so surprised when I saw the headlines pop up. I was like, I was aware of the Hunter Hanson case because the reporting you mentioned, and I mean, obviously it made a lot of headlines. So I was following it, I guess, just like everybody else. And I was just surprised. Like, I mean, normally when the president of the United States does something, you know, there's a reason for it. Like there were people who were lobbying for it, you know, who were saying, you know, there's been an injustice here that needs to be corrected. They're making a case for it. And then the president, you know, they make their decision. Some of them they turn down, some of them they don't. You know, and I think if that like a Leonard Peltier or something, right, where he's never been pardoned or commuted, but there's always been like a strong activism around him doing it. And if some president someday did do a pardon or a commutation, I mean, that would, whether I agree with it or not, it would make sense. It was like, okay, there were people asking for it. There were people campaigning for it, and it happened. And this one, I just don't, did they just like flip through a book somewhere and pick out names? I don't understand how this happened. And I guess that's your point, is that's one of the reasons why it's so frustrating, is why? How?
Well, he didn't pick it out of, I mean, they had made an application for the commutation or pardon.
Okay.
I mean,
makes sense.
and that's sort of referenced, you know, but an attorney filed, there's a process, how do you apply for a pardon? We have a system on the state websites to do it with the governor. So they applied. That brought it to the attention of pardon counsel, and they apparently, to me, did not look into the case other than what was applied for by a one-sided application. And then they said, well, yeah, this kid is young. He was young when it happened, and he's done pretty good in prison, so we'll sign off on this one. Well, that seems like what happened.
Chad, let's talk about this politically a little bit. We know that President Biden has created a lot of heat with pardons. Is this a way of sort of deflecting from some of the other ones? Like is he just is it just kind of flooding the zone? I maybe this is completely stupid, but I'm trying to like find logic here. Is he trying to like flood the zone, do you think, to distract from, because I know you didn't like the Hunter Biden pardon either.
No, I don't like the Hunter Biden pardon. I hate these. And if he's trying to deflect, all he's done is made a bunch more people angry. I mean, I've seen tweets from a friend of mine who's a state senator up in Duluth, who's angry about clemency to a synthetic drug seller up there that was part of this 1,500. I mean, this is broader than, you know, this case or the borders of North Dakota. The only thing, Lad, my question for you, is there a shortage of space in federal prisons that they're trying to alleviate? Or is there, it feels like I'm missing something, that there's something obvious here, but I mean, are they trying to alleviate prison space?
Well, I'm sure that's something. I don't know we won't know what kind of consideration that was, but he wasn't taken up and in the Walls bed anymore. They had him in a halfway house in Minneapolis. So it wasn't like he was taking up something in the Walls that a violent offender couldn't get into. He wasn't taking up that space anymore.
Yes, but the politics of this are stupid. I mean, if that's why they're doing this, the politics are stupid, because it's you said at the outset, it's people on the right and the left who are looking at this and are like, I can't wrap my head around what the hell they're doing there.
Well, it's brazen, and I'm wondering if one thing that worries me too is when we do this, if one president does it, it's almost like it gives it cover for more. Like we set precedent. So if we move the goalposts a little more, we're moving the Overton window, and we're making things that might not have been acceptable more acceptable. And I mean, we've heard President Trump. I mean, he in his first term had a lot of pardons that I think we could go down the list. Roger Stone. Some of his campaign people, a lot of them that we go through that look pretty dirty. And he's promising to do a lot more. It's a lot of the January 6th people and whatnot. And I'm just wondering, like how it makes it so much harder to be critical of that stuff when the other side's doing it too.
Yeah, you're defining deviancy down in a sense. And what we all as commentators and people that care about our country, we actually want confidence in government. It might not be the ideology we particularly vote for, but whoever's in there, we want confidence that there's deliberation and forethought. And this arbitrariness creates a confidence problem, again, in the government, that we have no shortage of confidence problems now. And that's where you would think someone that is cerebral, as President Biden has been for 40 years in there, we might not agree with his ideology, particularly in rural North Dakota. But the bottom line is we were missing that in this current era, we're missing that cerebral, okay, we're going to do things that create confidence in government. This is the opposite of that.
There's a difference between disagreeing with something the government does and having no idea why they did it. Or seeing their motivations as like if, again, the Leonard Peltier keeps coming to mind, but if a president decided to grant clemency or a pardon to Leonard Peltier, I would oppose that. I think that would be a mistake. Yeah. But I could probably, I wouldn't feel about it the same way I feel about this, because I feel like I could understand. Like there's an argument to be made there. And even if I don't agree with it, it's like there was a process and there was an argument, and okay, there's some logic to it. I understand it. I don't agree with it, but I understand it. I don't understand this. And I don't understand Trump wanting to pardon, his campaign people or the January 6th people. I don't understand that. It just looks like an abuse of power. But it's not even the usual, where somebody got some money. Like when Mark Rich got pardoned, well, there were all sorts of political donations there. It wasn't hard to discern the motivation. Here, does Hunter Hanson have money? I mean, are they giving somebody money? What happened?
That's the arbitrariness that's really frustrating. And like I said, guys, I want to tell you, Pardon Council, what the value of a rural co-op elevator is to a whole swath of people that are reeling from this. I want you to know that. I'm suspecting that Pardon Council in their office have no clue about that. I want a chance to tell you that when you're going to do this kind of stuff. And then you decide, but you at least listen to me. That's what's frustrating.
And I think ultimately that's the issue here. They didn't explain the why on these things. They didn't talk to people on the front end. I don't think we'd be here right now if they'd done the due diligence of talking to people like Ladd and the judges that were involved and the victims involved. I don't think we'd be here if there was like a clear process of how this worked. But Ladd, it's my understanding people literally lost the farm over this kind of thing. I mean,
the last I heard, there were 4 businesses that went bankrupt. Just a good example, though, some were right on the edge. The Wilton elevator lost $36,000, but he had ordered over $2 million of grain, but he didn't have a chance to pick it up until we got involved and froze his grain trading because of our investigation. But if Wilton elevator would have let the $2 million some dollars of grain go because they'd contracted with them, because they were confident from their prior deals, If they would have let that $2 million out, it would have bankrupted the Wilton elevator. There's another co-op elevator with a whole circle of people that would have been affected. Well, four businesses like that got totally bankrupt. Others lost tens and hundreds of thousands, but they survived. But some of them were right on the edge of letting $2 million of grain out the door. Then they would have just fired, they would have just been insolvent. And luckily, the Wilton elevator, he hadn't just got the trucks there yet to get that $2 million worth of grain. So there was a lot of close calls too,
Well, just imagine. I mean, you're dealing in agriculture, so you're dealing with family farms. You're dealing with small businesses, family businesses. A lot of businesses that can't. I mean, that car dealership you're talking about probably can't afford to take a $45,000 hit on a bunch of cars. That may have pushed them under. And you think about how we talk about how life-altering going to prison is in jail, and we should. It is. That's real. It changes your whole life. For the rest of your life, you are somebody who went to jail. There's no getting away from it. So, I mean, that's life-altering. But think also how life-altering it is, and generationally life-altering if mom and dad lose the business or mom and dad lose the farm. And then, I mean, that changes their lives. That changes their kids' lives. That changes grandkids' lives. It is life-altering. And where's the clemency for those people?
And I think that gets to Judge Hovland's point was we had a process through the federal court system. He was sentenced, victims were heard, and then after he did pretty well in prison, it sounds like, they filed for a motion to reduce his sentence. Judge Hovland holds another hearing, reviews the application, considers, the effect on victims, and declines it. All evidence from Judge Hovland's email was nobody even looked into the fact that he's already re-reviewed the success that he had in prison and decided that commutation wasn't appropriate based on the amount of damage he caused. And now this pardon attorney office has no indication they even looked at that and decided to commute the sentence.
I hope that Hunter Hanson can one day, well, I guess now, rejoin society and become a lawful contributing person. I hope nothing for the best for him going forward, but he hurt people and he had a sentence and it should have been carried out. And this is wrong. And to Chad's point, this isn't just happening in North, this is happening all over the place. There's probably a lot of other local people in other places having conversations like this saying, why did you do this? And in a time where, Lad, to your point, where Americans are losing faith in a lot of our institutions, boy, this doesn't help very much.
No.
We're going to end it there. Lad, thank you so much.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Loud.
That's it for today on Plain Talk, the voice of North Dakota politics. Plain Talk is a production of Forum Communications Company. Got a question, comment, or suggestion? Leave us a voicemail or send us a text message at 701-587-3141. That's 701-587-3141. If you haven't subscribed to Plain Talk yet, you can find us on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform like Spotify or Apple Podcasts. For those of you who are already hooked, give us a rating or review. And don't forget to share or tell a friend. Special thanks to my co-host Chad Oban, and from myself and everyone at Plain Talk, thanks for listening. Yeah, but then they wouldn't get to hear my mellifluous voice.